Live. All right. Welcome to the third weekly meeting of the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance Interim Board of Directors. Live show.
I feel like there should have been some music intro to that. Dun dun dun.
Bitcoin Alliance. Promoting blockchain technologies for a free and equitable society. Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah. All right. So our first agenda item, I'm going to vote that we postpone because it's to create a new multi-signature wallet during this meeting. But since Sean King's not at a computer, I imagine that probably wouldn't be super easy to do.
Yeah, that's fine. And there's not a large amount of funds we have to be concerned about this moment.
Right.
Anyway.
I think there's like $20 or $30 worth of funds there. So I'm going to say, any objections to that?
Nope, I think it's a better idea.
Yep.
Works for me.
Okay. So those of you that have reviewed the bylaws, you'll notice if you have the minutes in front of you, myself, and I know Luke added some of this too, pointed out a specific couple things that we need to discuss. Officer positions, board member terms, minimum number of directors, quorum definitions, and membership levels and transparency. Is there anything in general that any of you wish to discuss about the bylaws before we go into the specifics? Any thoughts?
I was just curious, Sean King, how much time and effort you put into this, because I don't want to monopolize your expertise either. I was like, wow, we have like a lawyer, and that's awesome, but wow, I don't want to take advantage of that unfairly. But so I just wanted to appreciate you publicly to say, hey, thank you very much for the time you've already put into this. I hope it didn't, go too much into your holiday weekend or whatever.
No, glad to do it. I've got total probably 3 or 4 hours in it, so no big deal. And the suggested edits were certainly some of them I don't feel strongly about, but some of them had some rationale behind them that probably require a little explanation. So happy to explain any of them, and if you guys decide that you don't like it, it's fine too.
Yeah, that's why I made a note of some of those that I think most of your edits, Sean, that were just grammatical and stuff like that, I just went ahead and just confirmed them. I didn't think there was a need for us to go down every grammar edit as a group, but I did make a note of a few of the things that you had pointed out as far as officer positions, board member terms, and other things that I think we should discuss as a group before we make a decision one way or the other. But like Luke said, I totally second that. Thank you for spending time on that. I did my best to kind of get it started, but I'm not a legal expert. I just use big words. That's as close as I get. So
I don't even use big words, so I'm like super double appreciative.
Yeah.
Glad to do it.
Great. Okay, so should we start by talking about officer positions? Not necessarily who's going to fill them, although that is later on this agenda if we get that far, but specifically what positions to include.
Yeah, I mean, I saw down in section, where is it? Like, it actually talks about section 6, I guess it is, which defines them a little bit, or maybe that was somewhere else. Yeah, what the secretary's roles are, and because I'm not very familiar myself with the different traditional meanings of those terms and how we're, obviously it matters how we're going to interpret them, but like there were a few things I was surprised the executive director had. Like they're the one that admits members and some other different things that I thought was interesting, but I don't have any really big concerns either way.
Yeah, so just kind of big picture, the secretary of a corporation really is a ministerial type of role that really doesn't have any decision-making authority. Normally, well, not normally, it is. It's just somebody who is charged with taking minutes at the meetings and doing a couple sort of formal roles, but otherwise the secretary doesn't have significant power. When something needs to be certified to a third party as representing the official books and records of the company, it's the secretary that usually does that. So that position's not incredibly important, and there's not a lot of work to be done, but it is a position that we need. The executive director, on the other hand, is the way the draft of the bylaws, which was based on the Bitcoin Foundation. It's a pretty important position. It's roughly equivalent to president or CEO in a for-profit type of company. So it's the nominal sort of officer of the corporation who reports to the board of directors. but who does have power to call special board meetings if they feel like a decision needs to be made by the board that the executive director doesn't have authority to make. And so they do have a power to call board meetings and to do some other things in the bylaws that are other officers of the company would not have.
Individual. Right.
I was surprised that the way it's like Section 3.4 talked about being admitted. It sounds like the executive director would be the person that kind of admits each person, like actually kind of, I guess, vets them on some level to say this person can be a member of the organization or not. I was a little confused by that.
Yeah, I'm looking at that right now. I'll go ahead and just read that for reference. Section 3.4, admission, except as otherwise provided for by any board of directors resolution. Admission of members shall be made by the executive director upon a determination by the executive director that the member seeking admission meets the qualifications established for membership set forth in these bylaws. So, in my understanding of what that says, and Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the board of directors can pass any specific resolution that applies to categories or broad, like as far as like say anybody who meets these criteria therefore is a member. But the executive director is the one that makes sure that members, as they apply or join, meet those qualifications. Now, at this point, the only qualification we have for membership that's in the bylaws is that you're a real human individual applying for a gold membership or you're a real business applying for the platinum membership. We haven't really gone beyond that to say whether or not, well, what if you live outside of Tennessee? Can you still be part of the Tennessee Bitcoin? We haven't formalized that either way. So my understanding is just what that means is simply the executive director will be the one enforcing the qualifications decided by the board of directors. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the only qualifications currently in there are exactly what you just said. Either you're a natural or a non-natural person, so a human or a business entity, and you've paid the fee. So currently, those are kind of the only two criteria in the bylaws for membership. So when we define the different member classes, we could add additional criteria. But what we're saying there is that the executive director, can accept the membership fee and can accept the membership application. Presumably, the membership application would include, if you're a human, a copy of your driver's license or showing you're a human, and if you're a corporation, a copy of your employer identification number or something showing you're a company. And that combined with the check or a Bitcoin for the membership fee is good enough to be officially recognized by the executive director as a member. But the board gets to set those criteria. The executors just check in the box to make sure they're met.
Cool. I mean, I envision like the executive director having to go into WordPress and like check approve or something like that. So I just wasn't sure if that's exactly what it meant.
Yeah, as far as the technical side, probably something along those lines. Really what that does is by giving the executive director that power, that means that you don't, at every board of director meeting doesn't start by saying, okay, here are the 5 people who just applied for membership, we have to all vote to approve them.
Gotcha.
Instead, it's saying that the executive director can make that decision based on the qualification.
Yeah, I want to make sure it scales too. So
yes,
if that's all the executive director is doing is vetting memberships, like that might be interesting. But okay, cool.
And
and just because the executive director is the one who makes the formal decision to admit the member, they're not the one that necessarily has to check the box or file the form. I mean, they can have an assistant or somebody else do that, but they're just responsible for the decision.
Cool.
Does that make sense, Luke?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so as the bylaws stand right now, and this is what I'd like to propose that we discuss now, there are 4 officer positions specifically included in the bylaws: executive director, general counsel, treasurer, and secretary. In our last meeting, we talked about how although we will need someone to act as chairman on the board of directors, Sean King pointed out specifically that he didn't feel that was important to be in the bylaw specifically because that's more of administrative rather than acting as the chief officer of the organization. The alternative proposal being that the executive director would be the chief officer, somewhat similar to a president or CEO, over the organization, answer to the board of directors, also serve on the board of directors, as would the other positions. So we would likely still have a chairman, but it wouldn't be in the bylaws. It would just be we say, hey, you're in charge of running meetings, or you're the that, at least that's
Yeah, and my issue with the initial draft was just that the chairman of the board is technically a board position, if that makes sense. Not in most corporations, the chief officer, the CEO, the chief executive officer, is the most senior officer. The chairman of the board is simply somebody that the board elects to fulfill the role as chairman. It's kind of like the person who chairs the Senate meetings. If you ever watch C-SPAN, it's just somebody who's elected for the moment or in general to kind of oversee the proceedings of the board meetings, and they have some other roles, some other small roles in the bylaws, but they're not usually an officer. So that's why I wanted that change.
And that's fine with me too. I think that if we have fluid meetings, where somebody's running the meeting this time because they're passionate about the contents of the agenda, and someone else might run it another time, that's fine with me.
Great. Yeah. Sean, Roy?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. And then so I added general counsel, or at least suggested that we add that since our last meeting, thinking that we don't have a position as it stands right now that really has the ability or authority to act as sort of the legal arm or the legal voice of the organization. And I think that would be something beneficial to have, especially, although we do want to separate personalities to some extent from this decision about which officer positions to include, at the same time, Sean King does have a lot of legal expertise and the ability to provide commentary on Bitcoin regulation and stuff like that that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate unless he had a position in the bylaws that specifically said that he was the legal representative, or at least the legal voice of the organization.
Well, isn't that also a position we can just hire out if we, had our own legal counsel as an organization?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that something that you see often, Sean King, as far as the general counsel role, or?
Yeah, it could go either way. So normally, a large company, or certainly a lot of charities where you have volunteers and you're not having to pay, will typically have internal counsel, usually called general counsel. And then smaller companies where they don't have the payroll or the resources to have a full-time internal general counsel will have typically what's called outside counsel that just provides legal advice to the entity. In this case, I don't feel strongly either way. I feel like whoever fulfills that role as general counsel, whether it would be me or somebody else, would be doing so on a volunteer basis for the most part, at least for the foreseeable future. So I wouldn't see them. I wouldn't see it as a cost decision. It's more just a matter of whether or not you want to have a officer of the company who is responsible for the legal end of it,
signing contracts and things like that.
Not so much signing them, but reviewing them and approving them for the executive director's signature, that sort of thing.
Okay. So I guess what I was thinking about is if we were to hire, for example, outside counsel, then I would imagine that person would still be responsible for the legal matters of the board and interacting with that outside counsel as it relates to different things. I wouldn't invalidate that position, I guess is what I'm asking.
Oh, correct. You could definitely have both.
Okay. Yeah. So if we have outside counsel, it doesn't automatically make them, the board's general counsel, and now they're somehow a board member. No, that's not how it works either. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the way that the Bitcoin Foundation has done this is that they have a general counsel, Patrick. I think his last name is Merck or something. Don't remember off the top of my head. But one of the things he's done in addition to doing typical things like reviewing contracts, reviewing bylaws and things like that, is he also periodically, when appropriate, publishes through the Bitcoin Foundation's blog essentially commentary on, like, the BitLicense, for example. To like legal commentary to say, as the general counsel of the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance or the Bitcoin Foundation, here's how we approach this. Here's our mindset on this. Here's the legal reasons why this is wrong. Essentially, very similar stuff to what Sean's already been publishing on his blog, as far as his analysis of the BitLicense. But it would be an elected position of someone who can essentially speak as the legal voice of the organization to say, this is our commentary on this.
Cool.
Are there any Well, and then the other's treasurer. Treasurer's kind of it's a must. You need someone to, keep track of folks' transactions and where exactly our Bitcoin is, so we don't, pull them out Gox and lose 100,000 or 500,000 or whatever it was. But that's not a super exciting role. But regardless, are there any, I guess, suggestions or objections to those 4 positions, additions that we should make? The Bitcoin Foundation has like 8 or 10 officer positions. So narrowing this down to 4 was specifically to take out some things like board chairman, vice chairman. They have a position called chief scientist, which we may want to do at some point, but I don't know if we're at that level right now.
Yeah, and the bylaws does give us the authority. It gives the board the authority to create or additional officer positions as needed. So this is not a once and for all sort of decision.
Cool.
Yeah. Are there any,
one thing you said, John, that I wanted to clarify, there was a couple of officer positions. I know the executive director specifically in the bylaws said needed to be a member of the board, but I think for treasurer or some of the others, maybe for secretary, they didn't necessarily need to be. Anyway, there was a difference there as to whether they did or did not need to be a member. I just wanted to point that out and make sure we have clarity on that and are good with how it's written.
Yeah, it looks here, the general counsel says they have to be a member of the corporation. That doesn't necessarily mean a board member, right? Same thing with executive director, must be a member of the corporation. Are you saying we should probably clarify the difference between just being a member and actually being a board member?
No, I think member of the corporation is the better way of phrasing it. I thought there maybe I'm misremembering. I thought one of the positions had required that they be a member of the board, but perhaps not. I'm good with member of the corporation.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. 6.8, when it talks about the secretary, says member of the corporation, and 6.7 for the treasurer says member of the corporation. Yeah, just double checking that.
It did say director, and then after Sean reviewed it, he edited those to member. It said director of the conversation. That's what it said before.
Cool.
Just for clarification, Sean, could you explain a little bit as far as what the benefit is to having to be member rather than director, rather than being open? I mean, does that mean that, I guess, any member of the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance can be an officer rather than just board members? Is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly that idea. And the idea really is just 2 things. Number one, to get additional opinions, and additional feedback. It is a board-controlled organization, as virtually a single not-for-profit is, but to limit those key officer positions only to members of the board, to me, just seems a little too cozy. I would rather have the option of bringing in outsiders when we felt it was appropriate and getting those sort of outside opinions and outside representations officers of the organization.
Okay.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, I see the logic there. My only hesitation is that our board positions are elected, and so if we're opening up board members, like director positions, to be elected by the membership, then the idea would be those are the people that are leading the organization. Meaning that one of those people will be the executive director, the general counsel, treasurer, etc. And to hire or to bring anybody on board as an officer with authority to act on behalf of the organization who's not elected would be a difficult decision, I think, for the board of directors to make without including the membership. Does that make sense? Oh, well, we lost him.
Lost him. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But I think all decisions are going to be like that, though. Like if we set up an action team, or we set up, we are the elected officials that are supposed to make decisions on behalf of the organization. So it's just potentially a more extreme example of the same thing we've already agreed to, which is we have authority to give other people authority to go do stuff.
Right. Well, I see what you're saying. That makes sense. I guess I was operating under the mindset that each one of these positions would be a board member, and maybe they all will be right for now.
Yeah, but I see that. I understand that there's no reason for that, because again, they're not necessarily voting.
Right.
They're still the board, and the board can still decide, hey, this role needs to be replaced or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Sean, are you back on now?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I gotta charge my phone, so I'm going to have my camera on mute. But
Okay, gotcha. Did you catch that commentary?
I did, yeah, and I agree. I suspect, at least initially, while we're getting this launched, that these positions would initially be board members, and the board's going to decide who these officer positions are. I just don't know that for all time we want to limit ourselves to requiring those be board members. We can always amend the bylaws. It's one of the authorities that the board has. So if you feel like we should limit it to directors for now, knowing we can change it in the future if we become uncomfortable, I'm good with that too. So I could go either way. My vote would be to open it up to members.
Yeah, I like the flexibility. I like the spirit behind it of getting outside opinion and outside perspective on things, and also just to have more manpower to get stuff done. So I personally think it's fine.
Yeah.
Again, it's all stuff that we get to approve anyway. So
right.
Speaking of getting things done, I think that it may be important to have some type of offer position that is responsible for the action teams initially.
Okay. Like one specific officer that's just in charge of coordinating action teams?
Correct. Otherwise, it's going to become an unwieldy beast soon.
Well, here's my thought. The bylaws are written in such a way that action teams are created by board resolutions. So it would actually be a resolution of the board technically that would form the team. The question ultimately is, what does each resolution for each team say? And my thought is, based on some of the feedback we've gotten, especially that John's gotten already, that a specimen board resolution, and that just has different sections. What the committee's charged with doing, areas it's charged with, how many members of the committee are there. What the committee is not permitted to do, specifically not permitted to sign checks for the organization or do stuff like that, and kind of put it out there.
Hey, Sean. Sean, it's really difficult to hear you. You're breaking up a good bit.
Wow.
If you disable your video, that might help with your bandwidth just a little bit.
I thought I had.
Yeah, then
we were looking up at your ceiling.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry about that. My thoughts are that since the committees are formed by board resolution, that we would provide a specimen resolution, and then we would circulate that to different people that we know are interested in serving on the committee. So, like Sean Roy, I know has some good ideas about serving one of the action teams, and knows several people who are interested in the website design and some of that sort of stuff. So maybe Sean takes that and then works with members of the public who he would perceive to be participating in this action team to kind of draft their own charter, that this is what we want this action team to do, and then bring that back to the board for edits and approval. We would then approve that action team by board resolution, and that action team would be up and running.
And so that's something we can do via writing, via email as well, right? We don't have to wait once a week to do that kind of thing, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Correct.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense. So that means that, Sean Roy, does that make sense? That then we wouldn't necessarily need one individual in charge of all the action teams, but each resolution would specify who's setting that up?
Yeah, I guess that would work.
Okay. And like a couple people have mentioned already, these bylaws do allow us to add new officers to the board of directors as we see fit in the future. This is just saying, okay, what are the 4 positions or however many positions we want to include in these bylaws right now, and we can add more as the need arises later. So is there so that we can move, if we can, we still have a give it to discuss and not a whole lot of time. Are there any objections to accepting these 4 positions? Executive Director, General Counsel, Treasurer, and Secretary?
I think that's fine.
I don't have any objections.
Okay, so all in favor of accepting the
that's fine.
Section 6.1 as written?
That's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Great, okay, so we're all agreed.
As far as the member terms, that was one of the things I was concerned about that we might get pushback on, because when people voted for our interim position, we did say it would just be till January. So that change is kind of new information based on the decision process made to give us the authority we have now. So that's my biggest concern. I'm currently not in favor of it, but I'd like to know the reason for changing it, because there might be a really good reason I'm not aware of. But I just know that we said, hey, you should vote for these people, knowing that they will only have any type of authority up until January. And then for us to change that is almost like some people might think of that as pulling the rug out from under them to go all the way to July, or June. So I just wanted your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree. Sean,
let me tell you why I proposed the change, and then it my concern may be unfounded. My only concern was that the bylaws are very specific about how directors are going to be added in the future. Essentially, it's going to be by vote of the membership following certain specific procedure. And I guess my concern is, are we going to have, between now and January, are we going to be far enough along that we're actually going to have membership to vote? In other words, I wouldn't want to be in a position where this board's authority lapses January 1 per the bylaws, and yet we're not enough, and we members enough of membership and member coordination to have elected a new board to succeed. So my thought in any was just to give more time to get more members on board, get all this formalities done before we're trying to try a quorum of members, which is either half, 2/3, 3/4. We decide hacking people down to get their votes.
Sean, I think you're cutting in and out a little bit as well.
Yeah.
We're starting to lose. Do you want me to try dialing you in? I could try that as well.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that as well.
Might be a better connection. But I actually
yeah,
definitely agree with what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. And I had some similar concerns too, to say this is a 2-year term. If the organization is still pretty small by the end of the year, and then we vote someone in, and then the organization grows quite a bit over the next year, year and a half, that might be interesting too. So that is a really important point. I think I think it kind of depends on what do we call enough people. Is it 100 people, 50 people, 20 people? Like, at what point do we define that the membership is large enough? Because a quorum is just a percentage, is my understanding. So how do we decide this is quote unquote enough? We had 20-something people that elected us. Was that enough? Like, how do we know that? What criteria do we use to define that?
Yeah, Luke, you want to dial me in, and I'll just drop out of the hangout?
Well, wait, I don't think we can dial in because it's a hangout on air, because I just tried that.
Oh, okay.
Because on a typical hangout you can, but the option is not there.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I've never tried that before on a live one, so sorry.
All right, Sean, we'll just cut you off if it gets a little bit bad, but it's working now as well. So.
Yeah, please do.
I don't know if you heard my comment there. Just my thought is, that makes a lot of sense. I just don't know what criteria should we use to define if the membership has grown enough to make a decision about its own future.
Well, when we had this founding membership class, which is one of the things that I added to the bylaws, which I defined in the bylaws as any gold member who joins prior to, I think I said December 31.
Yeah.
We could change that to say it's any gold member who joins prior to, say, November 1. And then that would allow us to develop a membership prior to November 1, which then during November and December could vote on a new board of directors to take office effective January 1. That would be another way of approaching it. We could put it out there. People who wanted a vote in that board of directors would have to join and become a founding member prior to November the 1st or November the 30th, whatever. And that may provide people an incentive to actually want to go ahead and become founding members and sign up quickly so they can have a voice in that, who the board is.
Just to make sure I understand your concern, it's that you want to give enough time for the vote itself to take place and enough time for there to be a significant number of people relative to the next 2 years of the organization making that decision. Is that right?
Correct. And as far as what enough is, I guess my thought is if we announce next week or in 2 weeks from now that we're up and running, our bylaws have been filed with the state or our articles have been filed with the state, Anybody who joins prior to November 1 will be a founding member and can participate in the election of the board. Then,
is there a reason to have that hard?
However many we get, it would be however many we get.
Is there a reason to have that hard deadline other than just saying we're voting during this period, and if you're a member, you get to vote?
You mean for founding members, or Luke?
Yeah, no, I was just curious to say, like, if the vote's going to be for example, let's say we vote in December or January, we vote in whenever we have the vote. Is there a reason to have a deadline prior to that vote, as opposed to just like, hey, as long as you're a member on the day of the vote, you get to vote?
No, yeah, good point. I don't see why we'd need to have a firm deadline. We could just say as long as you're a member, whoever is a member, on the day of the vote, that'd be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it now being September. We've got, 3 months. If we think this thing's going to grow significantly within 3 months, then we're good. If we don't think it's going to grow significantly in 3 months, then it kind of almost doesn't matter in a sense. Like if the next 2 years, I don't know. That's just kind of my thought. I feel like we all kind of believe this thing's going to take off to some level. So I'm personally okay with just sticking to what we previously agreed with. But I have that same concern. I think it's a valid concern. Like if we're this tiny organization now, and then in 6 or 9 or 10, or 12 months, we're a large organization and a very, very small group of people made the decisions for that for the next 2 years, that might be a concern.
Here's my proposed solution would be that it's more or less in line with what Sean was suggesting, but slightly different timeline. What we did say. It is true that we did commit when we were elected to serve as interim board members that we would serve in that role through January, and then either stay on if we were reelected, but either way there would be an election. I think we need to stick to that as long as we can, because that's the commitment we made. If come that time the organization is not picking up, then we can reevaluate that. But I think at this point, what I would say is that what we should do is we should, establish the organization, open up membership levels. And I think we should have the founding membership class, but it's anyone who joins between whenever we open membership and the January 31st, 2014, or 2015, sorry, January 31st, 2015 is a founding member, and the election takes place during the whole month of January. So that by January 31st, we have a newly elected board, because that gives us a little extra time, but it's still within that January timeline. And that means that, because, even before the election, we're going to need people who are interested in becoming board members to essentially campaign, to profile themselves and to publicize the reasons why they would like to get involved before that election, so that people can make an educated vote.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think that sticks to the spirit of what we were trying to say. And the nice thing too is we come November, December, and we're like, guys, we don't have the membership here to make a decision that's this binding for the next 2 years. That's easily something we can bring to the wider membership and say, hey, we're thinking of extending this in the best interest of the organization. Are there any major disagreements? We're kind of open for discussion. So I like that. But I think that's a little bit, because I just think it's going to cause less confusion than just, wait, whoa, all the way to June or July. That seems odd, So I like that.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I think when we have our board election in January, assuming that we do, I think that if we have, say, 12 open board member positions, I think we should only have an election for maybe 6. And then the following January, so if board members have a 2-year term, so the off year would be when we have an election for the other 6. That every year, essentially, you have an election for 6 board members, unless someone resigns or there's a vacancy between then obviously you would adjust accordingly. But that way, even if in 2015 the organization gets very large and much larger, then all of a sudden those new members can vote for new board members next January.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep.
Okay. Sean Roy, what do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I think that's what we had originally talked about anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely one of them. So I think that we're all in agreement that it sounds like to keep it at the keep the terms at 2 years between January and December, because that was Sean King. That was one of the things that I wasn't sure, but it looked like you were eliminating the term limits from the bylaws, or at least editing them to some extent, and you were at least suggesting that we do. Was there a particular reason for that?
No, I didn't mean to limit the term or eliminate the term limits. I think 2-year term limits is fine, but there was a contradiction how they were originally written, because they said there's a 2-year term. Also said that directors will serve until their replacement takes office. So it's got to, it can be both. 2-year term limit, and after 2 years, you have no more authority.
Sean, your video's back on and your audio got... Sean, your video's back on and your audio got crazy.
I don't know why the video keeps going on. That's weird.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right, so...
Right, so I think what you were saying, John, it sounded like was that you were just worried about the confliction of terms, and that either a board member serves until the next board member has been appointed, or they serve 2 years as a limit, not both, because obviously that could mean that someone's serving more than 2 years. Is that accurate to say that was what your concern was?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that's something that we can easily change up in the language. But regardless, just to make clear, we're all on the same page. 2-year term limits, January to December. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you for typing that up, Luke.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that Sean proposed as an edit to the bylaws, and one thing that we talked about briefly on the phone, him and I, was that, and this is something we all need to discuss as a board, we've touched on this. Now that we're down to 4, if we were to formalize the bylaws as they stand right now, we would immediately need to elect a 5th board member, at least interim board member. The only problem there being that to elect a board member, we would have to have paid membership according to our bylaws, and we don't have paid membership right now. So even if the 4 of us all of a sudden paid membership dues and then voted on a 5th board member, I don't feel that that would accurately reflect the organization's interests, the membership's interests. And so we were talking about possibly, for the interim, between now and that election, lowering the minimum to either 3 or 4, so that we're still in line with the bylaws, but we're not forced to bring someone on without a full membership vote. Because I think we have a lot of people that would be good candidates to serve as the 5th interim board member, but the question now is, okay, well, it was a little fuzzy how we were elected in the first place, and that it was the think tank group of everybody that was involved with Bitcoin and wanted to be there for the vote, and that was all publicized in advance. But now that we have bylaws, according to those bylaws, someone has to be a paid member of the organization to vote. And we don't have any paid members yet. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on that, as far as should we lower that from 5 to 4 or maybe 3, or should we keep it the same and find a way to bring on a 5th, or should we temporarily lower that limit to 3 or 4 and have that set in the bylaws that raises to 5 in the coming year after we've had the full election? What are your thoughts on that?
I like the last option.
The temporarily lowering it to a 3 or 4 person limit, and then beginning at the end of January raising that to 5.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think right now we're a very top-heavy organization. We've got 4 big heads running the whole board, and we're still figuring out what the body of the whole organization looks like. So that's my current thought on it, and I think that there is so much to be done that anybody, whether or not they have a quote-unquote title of board member or not, I think can actually do the most significant work for the organization regardless of their title, and I think that would, if they're interested in those positions in the future, that would go a long way towards their candidacy, I guess, for being elected in the future. That's my personal thought, but it's again, it may be another one of those concerns, and I know that we have already discussed the actual vote count from the night of the vote. There are people that did receive votes and could, in my mind, be considered, even based on the current thought of how we got here, just say, hey, well, these people also received a certain number of votes, and it's kind of like if this person can't serve the very next person in line, that makes sense to me. I just don't know that it's critically necessary for the progress of the organization between now and a full vote. It might be. I mean, we're trying to be as open as we can, and everybody's input is valid, and we've already demonstrated, I think, this week that input that we got is making us think differently about what's a priority right now, such as our communication policy.
Right.
So I think that I don't have as big a concern about increasing it. So I would say, yeah, just lowering it down so that we're within the bylaws and adjusting those to say that this is what we want it to be once we have beyond the interim position. And this kind of even addresses some of the concern we had previously about filling the full 2 years. Well, that we can make it clear that doesn't apply to interim board members, and it wouldn't. And these limits also maybe don't apply to interim. And really, what matters is the full board has the number we feel is going to be effective for that term.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Sean, Roy?
Yeah, it does make sense. One thing that I'm thinking about as this is all being talked about is what exactly is the mechanism for a Joe Snuffy off the street who wants to campaign to become a board member? How is that a living thing?
That may relate to our monthly meetups on some level. We may have to dedicate some time to that where people can discuss their vision for the organization.
But that's location specific.
And is that something that needs to be in the bylaws?
As far as campaigning?
Yeah,
okay, so one thing we don't have right now what the Bitcoin Foundation does is a private membership forum, and that's where they campaign. Most of the people who run for the board of directors of the Bitcoin Foundation already have some sort of platform in the Bitcoin world, but they also start a thread specifically for candidates to introduce themselves and say, here's why I would like to serve on the board of directors, here's what I'd like to accomplish, and then for people to discuss and ask questions. At this point, we don't have a membership forum, but we could definitely have one by the end of the year before the elections happen.
Yeah, the bylaws say that board elections will take place under procedures prescribed by the board that are not inconsistent in any way with the bylaws. So my thoughts is that when it comes time to have the election, you would at a meeting or on the website or whatever, you would solicit nominations for the board. The executive director would gather all of those nominations, create a slate, and then at the member meeting, that slate would be what would be voted on by the members, and we would prescribe in advance of that meeting, how the election would work and et cetera.
Right. Yeah, I like that personally. I think it gives a lot of flexibility. I think we could come up with, between the four of us, different ideas for how people should campaign. But once the campaigning starts, I think we might be surprised that there's other ways people want to go about doing it. But I like the framework to say at least, hey, we're going to at least have a framework, which you just described, Sean King, which I think is good. It's just saying, hey, we're going to solicit for people who want to be members, and then we're going to have a process for getting that information out there.
Yeah, and then we'll have to get the details of that as that date approaches. But I think at this point, first things first, approved bylaws become an organization. But that's something that we're going to have to either dedicate a lot of time to as far as election strategy and all that stuff, or form some sort of action team specifically geared towards, preparing things for the election. But
probably falls under legal policy.
Yeah, it probably does follow. Yeah, it would fall under legal policy. Yeah. But either way, I think that's something we can come back to. So just to come back to that, are there any objections or other thoughts on the idea of proposing that we lower the board member limit to 3 between now and January, or 4, either way, and then we increase that? Do we have that set in the bylaws that after the January election that increases to 5? Are there any objections to that?
I don't have any objections to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't either, but again, I could go either way. Like if we want to spend a week and just, like I said, bring in someone or two someones that were already somewhat voted for, I'd be fine with that as well. But I don't know that it's, I don't know that it would hinder the organization not to do so.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could go either way as well. I think I'm leaning towards keeping to 4 just because there's definitely a significant gap between the number of votes for the 4 of us and the 2 runners-up that were tied for the next position. It's a significant enough gap that I feel like it would merit another vote.
Okay. I haven't seen the numbers myself, so okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can share the specific votes if needed. I have the tally here. I think John Barrett has the actual ballots that people use to vote. But there's a significant enough gap that I feel like it would be best if we actually had a second election. But unfortunately, to have a second election,
You got to have
actually
members.
you'd have to have divine membership.
Okay. So I'm just going to say we're cool with we're lowering that number.
Okay, cool, great. And that's an action point as well.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the next agenda item was specifically about what defines a quorum. This is Sean King and I touched on this briefly on the phone after he reviewed the bylaws. Was that, so we've talked about before how we want to make sure that obviously that the board of directors represents the membership, and that some things can be presented to the membership for vote, for an advisory vote on what we should do. This definition, essentially, there was not a differentiation in the bylaws up to this point as far as what makes a quorum. Is the majority just a 50%, like a 51% majority, or is it a 75% majority? And so my proposition would be that what we should do is that say that for any board of director decision, that there must be at least 75% of the board of directors either present or voting by proxy on that issue for the issue to represent the full board of directors. So that's relatively high, but that makes sure that because our board members are elected, that does make sure that they are required to have a say in board decisions for the most part that require the full board. But then
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and then the other side of that would be that the membership, like if we're having a vote, for example, for our board members, for elected board members, that you would only require at least a 50% majority. And the thinking there being that as we grow, we may end up with hundreds of members, or over 1,000 members, and come election time, many of them may just not want to vote. That they like to support the organization, but they don't have a say one way or the other. And if we had the 75% requirement on the membership, that would mean that for elections we'd actually have to track down every 3/4 of our membership to get them to vote. Just thinking long term. Obviously, this won't be an issue in January because we probably will have a very small membership base at that point. So.
Well, my thought on that is what do like homeowners associations generally? I'm trying to remember the last time I was at mine. They have policies for these that are generally accepted, and that might be an example we could go from. Because there are times I can remember being in an HOA meeting where they're like, we want to vote, but we can't. There's just not enough people here, and there was a room full of people, but it just didn't meet the requirements. I don't know if it's 50% or 75%. I think it's pretty low. Not the whole neighborhood shows up. That's for sure. But I mean, I think it makes sense to me. I think 50% is still a significant group considering how many people join organizations and then aren't actively involved. But I don't know how that number compares to other similar organizations.
In most board of directors minutes or bylaws that I've seen for for-profit entities, it's usually 50%. I think the U.S. Senate is 50%. I'm going to Google that right now.
Well, there you go. Hey, good enough for them, good enough for me, I guess.
I don't know. Do we want to use them as an example?
Probably not recently, anyway. But there was a discussion about there potentially being two different numbers, one that's 3/4 and one that's 50. So I think the distinction we're making, just to be clear, is that board member votes we're looking for 3/4, and then member-wide votes 50% should be enough.
Right. Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Okay. And I think the reason why it makes sense to me is, well, just to add on to that real quick, is that I think that if we struggle to reach 75% majority on our board, then we have a board issue. Like if we can't get 75% of the board to vote on a specific issue, then we don't have involved board members, and something needs to change. So I think we should build that in.
Yeah, I think like Section 4.7 that Sean commented on, though, this does say members. It's not necessarily saying board members, so I think that may actually have to change to 1/2, and we have to clarify, because this is talking about members voting, members of the corporation. It's not talking about us voting as a board.
Right, but Section 5.11 does talks about the board vote. So there's two different sections here.
Okay,
so
cool.
We're saying we need to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a good edit then, Sean. We do want to change that to.
Yeah, the U.S. Senate is 51%. So maybe that's what we should do.
So yeah. Okay. So actually, then this one we would want to remove. Then we're going to keep it 2/3 as it relates to members. So. Oh, I'm sorry. Change it to 1/2. Your edit is a good edit.
Okay.
Okay.
And Sean Roy, what are your thoughts on that? Are you
No, that sounds fine. I think 51% is good.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, just making a note of that to make sure those are both changed. Okay, those are the big issues. Oh, real quick, I want to skip over membership levels because I think that's potentially a longer discussion. Real quick, and Luke's suggestion of adding something on transparency to the bylaws. I thought that was a really interesting suggestion. Something that we haven't. Right now, there's nothing in the bylaws about our transparency. It's just,
to me, why it came to mind is in the bylaws, it does talk about we're going to have a meeting at our corporate office. Well, we don't have a corporate office, and so there's these things in there that don't make sense even right now, and where it's like in my mind, if we just say, hey, for example, our board meetings are open, that's a pretty significant thing that we all agreed on early on, and even as we got elected as interim members, we all kind of thought that would be a cool idea to do. So I think that would be pretty fascinating to have in the bylaws, because if I don't get voted in at the next, I want to know whoever is running the organization that I helped found, in a sense, that they're going to be open and honest and transparent with me, so that as a member of the organization, I can still be involved even if I'm not on the board or whatever. So it's one of those what would I want done if I wasn't in the position I'm in today, and that's definitely something that and again, they can change the bylaws at any time, but I think it's pretty clear if any board decides to remove transparency from the bylaws, that's a pretty significant step, and most members of the organization would be like, whoa, I think we don't want to be part of this anymore. So by putting it there in the beginning, I think it kind of sets a tone for how we would like the Tennessee Bitcoin Alliance to function. And again, we understand that there may be other states that are looking at us as an example. By having an open and honest thing, and that does mean there's going to be potentially more human drama to deal with, because things that some people don't have enough context for to understand might get offended or upset by something that's discussed. And I think that's a decision we're purposely, and I know a lot of people in the open source community, for example, deal with this, because all the source code is completely open, and you deal with a lot of human drama where people have very strong opinions and are just maybe rude and not very mature about how they express those opinions. And I'm not saying that's happened at all in our group. I don't think it has at all. But I do think that it's a potential when we make this stance to say, hey, we're going to be transparent and we're going to deal with all the stuff that comes with that. But I think it's worth it, personally.
Yeah, there's a trade-off between transparency and efficiency. And
yeah,
and I think we've got to find a way of walking that tightrope and checking both boxes as much as we can. My suggestion would be not that these meetings are open in the sense that general members can just show up at a board meeting. My thought there is exactly the issue you just mentioned, Luke, where you get an unruly person that just, it becomes where you can't transact business and get things done because they're speaking up and interrupting even though they're not members of the board. But I do love the idea of broadcasting the board meetings as we are now.
Yeah, and that's what I think of when I think of transparency. It's not so much that you can come and disrupt our, we've been elected to fulfill a role and we have responsibilities, and if we don't want to create an environment that enables us not to fulfill those responsibilities. But transparency, if we talk about it specifically in terms of there has to be a way for others to know what we're deciding and talking about. If that's what we put in the bylaws, whether that's through, like we're doing now with Google Hangouts or whatever technology comes in the future, just the basic idea that we're going to specifically not do something that the previous organization has been criticized for, which is being too closed, not releasing minutes quickly enough, that kind of thing. I think if we set out to say this is what we expect of anyone running this organization, and just the fact that we happen to be the ones running it now, we expect it of ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm for that.
Okay.
I would be for a provision that would say something like, as often and as much as administratively feasible, the board meetings of the corporation will be broadcast or webcast to the general public or something like that.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, and I'm in favor as well as adding some kind of transparency clause to the bylaws. As long as we, the way Sean just phrased it right now makes sense, as long as we make it, we don't make it too strict that we tie ourselves down. So we don't make it every time 2 or more board members are in the same room, it has to be live broadcast, because then we can't hang out and drink a beer. We just have to make sure that it's strict enough that it ties future board members to the transparency that we want this foundation to, or this organization to represent, but also loose enough that it doesn't tie us down too much. It doesn't restrict our abilities to get stuff done. I think that, but I agree. I think in principle, though, in general, I think we should add a transparency clause to the bylaws. Sean Roy?
Yeah, absolutely.
Quiet today.
You know my feelings.
Okay.
I've had a lot going on.
I understand. But transparency good for you?
Absolutely.
Cool. Great. So, Sean King, would
Yes.
you go ahead and would you draft a transparency clause and suggest that as an edit to the bylaws so we can review that at some time after this meeting?
Yes, be glad to.
Great.
So we've got technically 4 minutes left here.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. There are a handful of things left on the agenda, but we don't have time to go over all of them between now and the end of the meeting. Is there anything specifically out of this or off of that that's not, whether or not it's on the agenda, that any of you feel like we need to discuss now at this meeting that's time sensitive?
I just think at the next board meeting, maybe first on the agenda, and I know it may take a while, though hopefully it won't. We do need to get the membership classes figured out. Also, my hope would be that essentially I think we've approved all the edits to the bylaws. So,
yeah.
With the exception of me drafting some transparency language to be inserted. So once that's done, hopefully we can agree on that by email over the coming week and go ahead and get the articles filed with the state.
Right. The only thing that might hold us up there is, there are two things. One, I think we should do now is we need initial officers. So we need to select who's actually going to fill those positions, to file the bylaws, to specify the initial officers. But we also have to I think if we have to file our bylaws, then we have to either discuss membership levels before that, or just take those out of the bylaws as it stands right now. Because right now the membership levels are in there, but that's not something we voted on yet. I know there's a couple different propositions to how the membership levels would work.
My suggestion would be to just put in the bylaws that the board shall determine the types of membership, and not included in the bylaws.
yeah, I was leaning that way too. It seemed a little strict to have those organized and even have any kind of pricing or anything like that in the bylaws, because that, I mean, if the fiat currency changes significantly in the next few years, just certain things that I think that we may decide a need for many more types of members. So yeah, I agree with that, Sean. I think putting that stuff in the bylaws seems a little restrictive to me, because in some ways, as a nonprofit organization that needs to be self-sustaining, that's like our business model that can change based on the climate.
Right. That makes sense to me.
Because I don't know if you saw, I had a comment about the platinum. Like, it just leads me to other questions. Like, if we're going to define a platinum, then we have to define, well, why, and what, because it raises questions. It's like, well, if we let this company that is has a bad reputation in the industry become a platinum, do we have a process for that? And I think it raises a lot more questions that we don't have answers for yet.
Okay. So let's go ahead and postpone that discussion and make sure that, and we'll discuss membership levels at a later date, take that out of the bylaws and say the board will decide this at some point. We will have the transparency clause, though, and I know we only have a minute technically, but
I can stay later if we need to.
Can we go ahead and select board officers so we have starting board officers to fill those 4 positions?
It's fine with me. I mean, especially if it's needed for the to file the paperwork.
As far as I know, I believe it is.
I have nothing on my agenda right now.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'll nominate Sean King for general counsel for sure.
I second that.
I don't think that takes 2 brain cells to rub together.
Yep. So we got that out of the way. As far as secretary and treasurer, I don't really care either way.
I nominate Luke Stokes for secretary.
Happy to do that. Not a problem.
That's one thing we should specify is that, and according to the bylaws, one board member can hold multiple positions.
Yeah.
So there are 4 positions. There are 4 of us, which fits nicely, but we also don't have to.
Yeah.
Do it that way.
As far as executive director, I don't really care either way. I know Sean, Roy, you've been getting a whole lot done on the ground. John, you do a great job running the meetings, and I know that Sean King, you probably have more experience on this level than all of us probably put together. So I'm fine with whatever you guys decide as far as that position.
Well, I will recuse myself from consideration for that. Happy to be general counsel, but
so will I.
All right, well, John, you are. I elect John then.
Okay.
All
So,
right, propose John as the executive director then.
is anybody going to second that vote, or am I just going to sit here?
Oh, I'll second that. Sorry.
Second, there you go.
Okay. You got
Hey,
really,
John,
really
if you
quiet
don't-
there for a second.
If you don't mind, I'll vote for you as treasurer as well. You're the one that took the initiative to set up the multi-sig wallet, and you're currently kind of interested in that stuff. I'm happy to do it as well, unless Sean, Roy, unless there's something you're interested in. But the nice thing about treasurer is like.
But I don't have to.
Okay, yeah, no.
I think that with the multi-sig, we're all kind of.
I was just gonna say, like, I like the idea that the blockchain is our treasurer on some level.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, then I'll elect Sean or propose Sean Roy for that, because I think you're the one that's dealing with the current expenses of the organization as far as the hosting and the other stuff. So you
I guess
have
that's
more
true.
access.
I have.
Yeah.
I have spent a lot of money.
and so we need that data anyway. So if you can keep those records for what you've already spent, we need that organized, and then
I'll second that. I'll second that as well.
All right. Good.
So just to confirm, so I believe we just selected our officers.
Yeah.
So I would be executive director, Sean King would be general counsel, Sean Roy would be treasurer, and Luke Stokes would be secretary. Any objections?
Sounds good.
That sounds fun to me.
Sounds like we're all agreed. Okay, so we have our initial officers, and we'll serve in those positions until the board election, unless for whatever reason we need to change that.
Yeah. I would like to propose that if we have just a few minutes that we could talk about interim communication policies, because again, it's come up a couple times already with our members or pseudo members who haven't no official members yet, that it's a big enough concern because it is the face of our entire organization, and if we don't do it properly, we could really slow down our progress in a way that is just not effective for the amount of work we have to get done. So I think there has to be some kind of framework where, is it John that makes the decision? Is it Sean that makes the decision? Is it Alex or anyone else that we have involved in website updates? Even the social media accounts, I had access to the Nashville one for Twitter. I don't have access to the other one. I do have access to some and not the other, and it's like it doesn't really bother me, but I know it does actually bother some people. So I think just being able to do, and we may not be able to do it in a couple minutes, but it might be something we should start emailing about, or something to say, okay, what is a way we're going to present to everyone else that we make decisions as a board and as an organization as far as how we present ourselves. It's not like we're a burger joint down the street where you can go and there's the physical place. Our physical place is our website, and everything we put on there reflects on every member who wants to say they're a supporter of our organization. So even now, I do agree we need an action team for that, and we need to give a lot of responsibility to that team that we can oversight and overview, but I think even now there's some value in saying, hey, this is what we're proposing as far as how we're going to make these decisions. It sounds like how we've been acting is we're going to do things and then retroactively approve them and say, okay, that's cool, I'm good with that, or no, we need to change that. I'm personally okay with that, but I think it's clear some people are a little concerned with that and have different standards on what should be there and who should have input on it. So what are you guys' thoughts?
Well, I think that some of that's already been addressed in the action team SOP that I started drafting. I don't know if any of you guys have been able to look at that yet.
I did see that. Yeah, I thought that was done well.
Okay, I'm not done with that, and I've taken a few days off here, so I plan to get back to that and finish. But as far as communication goes, that's one of those areas that I think needs to be fleshed out a little bit.
Definitely.
But ultimately, the action teams themselves should be semi-autonomous, meaning they can do what needs to be done to get the job done. And then the board of directors, acting as an oversight, can deal with each issue as they come up, and that would flow through the team leader, the action team leader. So in regards to the website or social media specifically, because those are communications mechanisms for the the group, for everybody, out to the public, maybe we need to have some kind of special provision for the web and design team itself. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think
Hey guys, you all are outside of my realm of competency here, and unfortunately I've got to go, so I'm just going to drop off. You guys have a quorum, and
all right. Thanks,
so
Sean.
just knock
Thanks,
it out.
Sean.
All right, thank
Really
you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sean. I think it's definitely something we need a lot of clarity on. Obviously, I don't think, even if we spent the rest of the day hashing out exactly how we think this should work, it might probably would get done today. But it's something we need to start this conversation, because obviously we want to get stuff done, but we do want to respect the membership, and there was at least one complaint this past week, and then we've heard in the past as well that when things get published on the website, okay, well, why? Who decides that? And we haven't. It's true, we haven't clarified that, and we need to. As far as the action teams go, I think that for some of them, relative autonomy is definitely feasible, but that's probably something we're going to have to decide on a case-by-case basis per action team, like based on whatever they're doing. Because some of them are just, like legal and policy, for example. The main thing they're going to do is they're going to come say, they're going to review our stuff and bring it to the board. That's less of a outside stuff, but they also may meet with regulators and stuff, regardless.
That's why I have that section in the SOP that specifically addresses outside communications. Anything that communicates with the outside world, that has to be addressed, and how do we flush that out? And that's the one, I think, one of like maybe 2 or 3 sections on there that I don't have completely flushed out yet.
Okay. Okay. So we definitely have some work
needs to be done.
We definitely have some work to do there, but I think the immediate demand, as we've seen, and the immediate need, as we've seen from a couple different comments, is specifically protocol about the website, including our involvement as board members. So, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Related to that, and this is actually something I meant to bring up previously. I actually just got an email from Jesse. He sent it to the board related to the business directory and how he has a lot of that information originally on encryptnashville.com, and it got copied over to the current website. And that's an example of something that, and I remember I had a conversation with him a while back about that, where I want to make sure we're clear about our policies for even how we gather information, how we propose to maintain that information, and that does relate to the website, because that's who we are right now as an organization, is a website and a Facebook page and a meetup group. That's kind of that's what we are at this point in practical sense. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's important to address what are our policies for publishing stuff on the website, and even promoting. I've been thinking about. I've had some discussions with you, Sean, about the Bitcoin trader as an example. In different organizations, where if we put our support behind them, localbitcoins.com, if we put our support behind them, does that open us up for criticism in the future if there's a challenge there? The people that got in Florida that got arrested for money laundering and different things like that, and this even bleeds into kind of our stance on some of these issues. We're willing to take a certain level of risk for certain stances, and I'm totally for that, even if it's somewhat controversial. But these are things that are important as we start publishing things on the website. And if we can get the action team structured in place soon enough in the next couple weeks, I think I'm totally fine with that. And then we can actually have a structure that we all agree on, we vote on, say, hey, this is good, we're going to follow this structure. If we feel it's going to take longer, what are our thoughts on what happens to the website between now and then? I mean, are we okay with just making changes and responding to concerns and criticisms as they come up? Because that's another option as well.
There's, you had mentioned, and I actually had meant to talk to John about this at one point. I think I brought it up in a conversation because of some of the things that had been brought up about local Bitcoins on the website, and that's a concern. Just like Bitcoin Trader, it's a concern. If we send people, say, hey, look, this is how you go and buy Bitcoins, and you go out to a park at midnight.
Yeah, really.
And meet a guy in a black trench coat, and he stabs you to death and takes your money. I mean, what are the ramifications of that? So that's an issue that I think that should be addressed.
Agreed. Yeah, and as far as website edits, I think if it were just the 4 of us, including Sean, that were the entire organization and the entire organization's interests, and we were just kind of creating pages, editing them, and being like, cool, applying feedback, I guess, after it's already been published, which is what we've been doing, then I think that'd be fine. But now that I've had some time to reflect on it and received some feedback, I think that because we do have a greater membership, that some of them want to have a lot of input into, what exactly they want to see. They want to see things before the public sees things, is what it is. I think that's the key.
My first reaction to that would be, if somebody is so interested in the website that they want to see things going on there, then they need to volunteer for the action team and become a part of that mechanism, that machine that actually does those things.
Absolutely, but I think the general public doesn't even know that exists, or because it's still, a lot of it's still in our minds. But I completely agree. If someone has a concern, it's like you bring a problem to the board, you're now elected and deputized by the board to fix that problem.
Right.
I'm totally on board with that. I think that's great. I just think that between now and when that's an active thing that's outside of our brains and publicized, I mean, it's going to take weeks for people to even get that. We're going to have to talk about it all the time at our monthly meetings. When we go to Meetup, we're going to have to email a lot about it. We're going to have to put it on the Facebook page, on the website, and everything, saying, hey, if you see something you don't like, there is a process to get involved. And guess what? We really need you to get involved. We need your help. Please come on board. We have to.
That should be something we're actively working on right now.
Yeah, I agree. And if we can help make that happen, that would be great, because I do think that the more we can organize people to have their, not only be heard, but have their concerns addressed with action, because they are empowered to then provide that action, then I think we'll be in a good spot. But in the meantime, we're still publishing stuff on the website that we're doing, we're still tweeting, we're still putting Facebook stuff up there. It probably makes sense to say, okay, how are we going to vet the content? How are we going to, decide what goes up or not? These are important things to discuss. And again, maybe we can have that structure figured out in the next few days and say, hey, we're going to start our first action team officially, and it's going to be our social media team or website team or whatever we define it as.
Right.
I'm actually hoping to have that SOP done in the next few days. So,
cool.
Because I think that's such a hot topic, because it is the gears in which we're rolling on. That's the wheel.
It's the organization right now. It's the entire thing, in a sense.
Exactly. That's such a hot topic that I think that I've already put a significant amount of time into it, and it's not going to take much more in order to get it flushed out and finished.
Right.
Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that time, man. And if you need more help, definitely let us know. Because I thought I had looked at that, but I think I may have looked at a different document, because I'm actually looking for it now. And I'm not seeing the same thing I saw before. But I do remember looking over what looked to appear to be a diagram and a structure for how the action team would be structured. But if there's more information that you want us to contribute to or organize or write up ourselves, please let us know.
I'll go back and look and email you the specific links, just so that way I make sure that you've got them.
Cool.
Right, and I think our next meeting, it looks like our main agenda item is going to be to talk about the action teams. What are they? What are they tasked with? How are we forming them? That kind of stuff. So if that can all be done, and we can get some time to review that before then that can be our main topic discussion next week.
Cool.
I think the only thing. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, then in this meeting, let's at least just establish that we are publicly saying, hey, we recognize this as a problem, and we recognize that we're going to be as responsive as we can be in the next week to address issues as they come up. And we're publicly saying, for anyone who's watching the board meetings, if you have a concern, please come prepared to help us solve that, because that's what we're looking for, and you will be the first person to vet, in a sense, what we have so far in a real way, to say, hey, like, this is what we're thinking in terms of an action team and how you can contribute to this process. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I'm on board, totally.
Cool.
Alrighty, fellas, 15 minutes over is not too bad.
No, not bad at all.
Right.
Okay, so same bad time, same bad place.
Yeah, and John, real quick too, not sure if you noticed that the board email bounced back at me again. I'm not sure why that is, but
board email bounced back?
Yeah, I think I forwarded it to you guys again. But yeah, just drop me an email if there's anything I can do to help contribute to as well.
Okay, all right. So, you know what? I wonder if our apps account expired.
Well, I mean, Jesse just sent an email to it 49 minutes ago, and it came through fine for him.
But I didn't get that. Huh. Okay. All right. I'll take a look into it. Anyways.
Okay.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys.
All right. We'll see you later.
Bye.